So recently one of our students went for a data science interview in Infosys. So what I would do in this video is we'll discuss about top 5 questions which were asked in Infosys data science interview, and we'll go through the answers as well. This would definitely help you in preparing for your data science interview. Let's get started. The first question was, what is hypothesis testing? So basically, hypothesis testing is used for doing univariate analysis for identifying whether the variable has any relationship with the output. Now let's say that you are building a classification model and you have features like body mass index, and then let's say you have features like gender, and you are predicting whether person has a cancer or not, and there are several other features. Now in this case, using hypothesis testing, you can identify whether gender has relationship with cancer. You can use chi-square test for that. Then on the body mass index, which would be a numerical variable. So if you want to find out relationship between numerical variable and output, which is in the form of categorical variable, you can use t-test in this case. So hypothesis testing is basically used for identifying whether if there is any relationship, and if that relationship is happening by chance or it's a true relationship. So that's the purpose of doing hypothesis testing. Now another example that I can give you is related to COVID. So when COVID came, people went through the COVID vaccination. But how we can know that whether that COVID vaccination was effective or not? So in that case, what you can do is you can create a table of people which went through the vaccination. Let's say that these are the people which went through the vaccination and these people didn't go for vaccination. And then you can identify after vaccination how many people after 3 months of vaccination are getting infected with COVID. And then this kind of a table is created, which is also called as contingency table in case of a chi-square test. And based on this, a chi-square test is performed to identify if there is any relationship between getting vaccinated and not getting impacted by COVID. So this hypothesis testing is basically useful for identifying if any kind of relationship is happening by chance or it's an actual pattern. The next question is explain XGBoost model. So XGBoost basically stands for extreme gradient boosting. It's a type of gradient boosting model. Now what happens in XGBoost model is you have multiple weak learners which are trained one after another. Let's say weak learner 1, then you have weak learner 2, weak learner 3, and so on. So multiple weak learners are trained and the final output is combination of the results given by all the weak learners. So you are going to aggregate the results given by all the weak learners. Now let's say that you are training the XGBoost model for regression. So in regression, a continuous numerical value would be predicted. So the first weak learner would predict the actual label. Let's say you are building a model for insurance price prediction. And subsequent weak learners, what they would do is they would predict the error made by the previous weak learners. Now let's say that the actual insurance price is $15 and the predicted insurance price by weak learner 1 is $13. Then weak learner 2 would be trained on the features and it's going to predict this difference between the actual and predicted, which is equal to 2. So this is the label for weak learner 2 and the features would be actual features. So all the weak learners would get same features, but the label information would be different. And the idea in XGBoost model is every subsequent weak learner would try to make the model better and better by predicting any kind of errors made by the previous weak learner. And at the end, when you combine all these predictions, you are going to get your final output. That is nothing but XGBoost model. And in XGBoost model, the word X stands for extreme. So for every kind of methodology within this model building, extreme methods. So best methods are used. So XGBoost model can be trained parallelly. Then in terms of the regularization, it is using the L1, L2 regularization. Then when it comes down to cost optimization, it's using second order derivatives. So that's why this XGBoost model is the best model right now in the industry. And in most of the industrial use cases, this is preferred model. So we'll definitely get questions on explaining the XGBoost model during the interview. The next question is explain k-means clustering algorithm. So k-means is a clustering algorithm. So let's say that you have a data set. You have information about customers. You have their age. Then you have type of product they are using. Then you have salary. You have transactions that they have done in a monthly basis. What's the amount for that? And you want to segment this data. You want to identify different types of customers. Let's say customers with high salary and high volume of transactions. customers with low salary and still high value of transactions. So these different patterns you want to identify within the data. So in that case, clustering algorithms are used. Now what is k-means clustering? So in k-means clustering, k stands for the number of clusters. So in k-means clustering, you have to specify the number of clusters that you want. Let's say that your data consists of 10,000 customers and you want to segment this data into 10 groups where every group would have similar customers. Then you have to specify k is equal to 10 and that would create 10 groups of the data based on the similarity. And the groups would be created in such a way that all the information within the same cluster or all the data points within the same cluster are similar to each other. So k-mean clustering, it uses Euclidean distance metric. So remember this thing. And when you start k-means clustering, the initial centroids are selected randomly. Let's say that these are the data points you have. These are the data points. So initial centroids would be selected randomly. Let's say we are creating 2 clusters out of this data. So let's say this is our first centroid. This is the second centroid. So the first step is initialization. The second step is basically assignment. So to these centroids, the nearby data points would be assigned. So this point is near to this centroid. This point is near to this centroid. Then this one, its nearest centroid is this one. For this point, the nearest centroid is this centroid. So basically this is the second assignment step. And after that, the update step. So after assigning the data points to nearest centroid, the centroid position is updated. So now for this cluster, the centroid position would be here. So centroid is basically mean of all the data points. And for this cluster, now the centroid position over here, the center position of the cluster. And then these steps keep on happening till we reach a point where data points are not assigned to new cluster. So that is nothing but k-means clustering. The next question which was asked by the interviewer was on random forest model. So in random forest model, basically what's the random forest model within the ensemble methods? Random forest model, it is called as ensemble method because it is going to combine the results of multiple decision trees. So in case of a random forest model, multiple decision trees are built parallelly. Let's say this is your decision tree 1, this is your decision tree 2, and so on, let's say up to decision tree 100. So multiple decision trees are built parallelly and the results of all the decision trees are combined to get the final output. That's why this model is called as the ensemble model. Now in case of a classification, the prediction made by all the decision trees combined based on voting. So let's say that we are having 100 decision trees and out of that 70 decision trees are saying that sample belongs to class 1 and 30 decision trees are saying that new data point that you are giving, it belongs to class 2. Then in that case, the final prediction by the random forest model would be that the sample belongs to class 1 with probability 0.7 because 70% of the decision trees are predicting it to belong to class 1. In case of a regression, average value of all the predictions is taken. Now what happens in random forest model is it's using the concept of bagging. So this is used because if we give exactly same data points to all the decision trees, all decision trees would look exactly same like each other. And then they are not able to learn different patterns within the data. Then there is what's the use of building so many decision trees? So every decision tree would get subset of the data. So let's say that in your data, you have 1000 rows. So let's say first decision tree would get randomly sampled 800 rows from the data. Second decision tree would get randomly sampled 800 rows from the data. Third decision tree would get randomly sampled 800 rows from the data. So every decision tree is going to see different data. So every decision tree would be constructed differently. On top of that, let's say your data is having 10 features. So whenever the splitting is done at the time of splitting a decision tree, subset of these features is used. So every time instead of using all the 10 features, only 8 features are used. Again, these 8 features are selected randomly. Because of that, all the decision trees would look different than each other. And this helps in avoiding the overfitting which happens when you build a single decision tree model. So that's the advantage of a random forest, which it gets by using bagging. The final question which was asked was around neural networks. This is again one of the important concepts. So within neural networks, what's the role of activation function? So let's see how neural networks work. So in neural networks, you have an input layer where you have all your input features. Let's say you have 3 features in the data, x1, x2 and x3. So these features would act as an input to your neural network. Let's say these are the neurons which we have and the features are given as input to all the neurons. So similarly, these features would be given as input as well. Let's say then we have another layer, and then let's say a final layer where we are going to build, let's say, a regression model. Now, what is the activation function? So activation function is basically used for introducing non-linearity. So when we get input to this neuron, this input is weighted combination of the inputs. So let's say x1, x2, x3. All these three inputs are going as input to this neuron 1. And every input is multiplied by the weight W1, W2, W3. And these weights are learned during backpropagation. So when we train a model, these weights are learned. Now every input is getting multiplied by this weight. So if we don't have any activation function over here, what would be the output of neuron 1? The output would be W1 x1 plus W2 x2 and plus W3 x3. So basically the input that this neuron is getting is the weighted combination of the features which we are having. So if we don't use the activation function over here, and if we simply pass this value as the output, the neural network won't be able to learn complex pattern. It won't be able to learn non-linear patterns within the data. So the role of the activation function is to introduce non-linearity. And the typically used activation functions are sigmoid activation function, ReLU activation function, hyperbolic tangent activation function. And the role of those activation functions is to introduce non-linearity. So for example, if we consider activation function like a ReLU activation function, this is how it would look like. This is X and this is the output of the function. So in case of a ReLU activation function, the output is maximum of 0 and the input that it gets. So let's say that if after doing this calculation, if the value that we are getting is -5, then the output of the ReLU activation function would be equal to 0, because for any negative value, its output is equal to 0. And for any positive value, its output is equal to the input basically. So the role of activation function is to introduce non-linearity within the neural network model, which helps it in learning the complex patterns within the data. So I hope you guys now got clarity related to the questions which came in Infosys data science interview. Now these were the technical questions, guys. So during the interview, obviously you would get questions around explaining your projects which you have added on your CV. So be confident in explaining the projects in the right way. You would definitely get questions around the behavioral interview, how you have handled different scenarios in the past when you are working for any company. So be prepared to answer all those questions. But these 5 questions which we discussed today, you are going to get most of these questions in your data science interview. So definitely prepare to answer these questions in a confident manner along with the examples. So thanks for watching this video, and I will see you in the next one. Bye bye.